My wife mysteriously died on the same day she fought with my greedy daughter-in-law and threatened to change the will. At the funeral, I overheard my daughter-in-law whispering to my son, "What goes around comes around." I froze at my son's response. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Thomas, and I'm 64 years old. 3 weeks ago, I buried the love of my life, my wife, Margaret. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but every word is true. I never imagined that losing her would reveal something far worse than grief. Margaret died on a Tuesday morning. The day before, she'd had the worst argument I'd ever witnessed between her and my daughter-in-law, Stella. They were in our kitchen, voices raised, when I walked in from the garage. Margaret's face was flushed, her hands shaking as she pointed at Stella. "I know exactly what you're doing," Margaret said, her voice trembling with anger. "You think I'm some naive old woman, but I see through your lies." Stella stood there with that innocent expression she always wore, tilting her head like a confused child. "Margaret, I honestly don't know what you're talking about. I've only ever tried to help this family." "Help?" Margaret laughed bitterly. "You've been poisoning my son against me for months, making him think I'm some bitter old woman who doesn't want him to be happy." I should have intervened, but I was frozen. In 37 years of marriage, I'd rarely seen Margaret this upset. She was usually so calm, so measured in her words. "That's not true," Stella replied, her voice soft and wounded. "I love Levi, and I want what's best for our future together. If that means having difficult conversations about planning ahead, then yes, I'll have them." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Planning ahead? Is that what you call trying to convince him that we should change our will? That we should leave everything to you two instead of the charities we've supported for years?" The room went dead silent. Stella's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something cold flicker across her face before she composed herself again. "I've never said anything like that," Stella said quietly. "Margaret, I think you might be confused." "Confused?" Margaret's voice rose to almost a shout. "I heard you on the phone with your sister last week. You were laughing about how easy it would be to redirect our priorities once we got older and more dependent." My heart sank. I looked at Stella, waiting for her to deny it, to explain, to do something that would make this terrible moment disappear. Instead, she just stared at Margaret with those big, innocent eyes. "I would never say something like that," Stella whispered, and tears started forming. "Margaret, please, why would you think so badly of me?" Margaret turned to me then, desperation in her voice. "Thomas, you have to see what she's doing. She's manipulating our son. She's been working on him for months, making him think we're holding him back, that we don't trust him with money." I felt caught in the middle. Levi was my only child, and I wanted him to be happy. But Margaret had always been an excellent judge of character. She'd never made accusations like this before. "Let's all calm down," I said weakly. "We're family. We can work through this." Stella wiped her eyes delicately. "I think I should go. I don't want to cause any more problems." She looked at Margaret with what seemed like genuine hurt. "I'm sorry you feel this way about me. I really am." After she left, Margaret sat at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. "She's going to destroy our family, Thomas. I can feel it in my bones." That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She kept tossing and turning, muttering about phone calls and conversations she'd overheard. Around 2 in the morning, she got up to get some water. I found her in the kitchen, staring out the window. "I'm going to talk to our lawyer tomorrow," she said, without turning around. "I want to make sure our will is absolutely clear about our intentions. No loopholes, no room for interpretation." "Margaret, don't you think you're overreacting a bit?" She turned to face me, and her eyes were so sad. "Thomas, I've lived long enough to recognize a predator. That girl isn't what she seems." Those were the last real words we spoke. By 6 in the morning, Margaret was gone. The doctor said it was her heart, a sudden cardiac event in her sleep. At 61, she was relatively healthy, but these things happen sometimes. No warning, no symptoms. Just there 1 minute, gone the next. The funeral was 3 days later, a beautiful service. Exactly what Margaret would have wanted. Simple, dignified, filled with the people who truly knew her. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. During the viewing, I noticed how Stella stayed close to Levi, whispering comforting words, playing the perfect grieving daughter-in-law. She even brought flowers and gave a lovely little speech about how much Margaret meant to the family. But it was after the service, as people were filing out of the funeral home, that my world collapsed completely. I was standing near the back, accepting condolences, when I heard Stella's voice. She was just a few feet away, leaning close to Levi, speaking so quietly, I almost missed it. "What goes around, comes around," she whispered. I turned slightly, straining to hear Levi's response. What he said next made my blood turn to ice. She should have minded her own business. The cold, matter-of-fact way he said it. No grief, no sadness. Just a flat statement, as if they were discussing the weather. I stood there frozen, as the full weight of what I'd just heard settled over me. My wife was dead, and my son was standing at her funeral, talking like she'd gotten what she deserved. The weeks following Margaret's funeral passed in a haze of grief and growing suspicion. I couldn't get those words out of my head. What goes around, comes around. She should have minded her own business. They played on repeat in my mind, especially during the long, sleepless nights in our empty bedroom. I started reconstructing the last few months of Margaret's life, trying to understand what I'd missed. The signs were there, I realized, but I'd been too trusting, too comfortable, in my assumption that our family was solid. It began around 6 months ago, right after Levi and Stella announced their engagement. Stella started visiting more often, always with some small gift or treat for Margaret. "I just want us to be close," she'd say with that sweet smile. I never had a real mother figure. At first, Margaret was delighted. She'd always wanted a daughter, and Stella seemed genuinely interested in learning family recipes, hearing stories about Levi's childhood, participating in our holiday traditions. But gradually, things shifted. Stella began making small comments about our lifestyle. "You and Thomas work so hard," she'd tell Margaret. "You should be enjoying retirement, not worrying about all these charity commitments." Or "Levi feels terrible that you're still paying for his student loans. He wants to be independent, but he knows you won't let him pay you back." That last one particularly bothered Margaret. We'd never asked Levi to pay back the money we'd given him for college. It was a gift, freely given, the way parents should help their children. But somehow, Stella twisted it into a source of shame for him. The changes in Levi were subtle at first. He started declining our weekly Sunday dinners, claiming he was too busy with work. When he did visit, he seemed distracted, always checking his phone, cutting conversations short. The easy warmth between him and Margaret began to cool. Margaret noticed it immediately. "He barely looks at me anymore," she told me one evening. "It's like he's angry about something, but I don't know what I've done." Stella was always there with explanations. "He's just stressed about work," she'd say. "You know how men are. They don't want to burden their parents with their problems." But I caught her watching Margaret sometimes, studying her reactions like she was gathering intelligence. The first real red flag came about 3 months ago. Margaret answered the phone one afternoon, and I could hear Stella's voice through the receiver, though I couldn't make out the words. Margaret's face went white. "No," she said firmly. "Absolutely not. We've already discussed this." After she hung up, I asked what that was about. She wanted to know if we'd considered taking out a second mortgage on the house, Margaret said, her voice shaking. She said she and Levi have been talking about starting a business, and they need capital. "Did you tell Levi we weren't interested?" "That's just it, Thomas. When I asked to speak to him directly, she said he was too embarrassed to ask himself. That he felt terrible about even considering it, but their future depended on getting this opportunity." Margaret called Levi that evening. The conversation was brief and awkward. He claimed he didn't know anything about Stella asking for money, that it must have been a misunderstanding. But his tone was defensive, almost hostile. "She's just trying to help, Mom," he said. "She sees how much I worry about providing for our future." "Since when do you worry about money?" Margaret asked. "You have a good job, and we've always told you we'd help if you needed it." "I don't want your help," Levi snapped. "I want to make it on my own." This was new. Levi had never been prideful about money. He'd always been practical, accepting help when it was offered without making it a source of conflict. After that call, Margaret was quiet for days. She started paying more attention to Stella's visits, listening more carefully to her comments. What she discovered disturbed her deeply. "She's rewriting our family history," Margaret told me one night. She talks about how difficult it must have been for Levi growing up with parents who had such high expectations. She makes it sound like we were demanding, controlling. That's ridiculous. We've always supported Levi's choices. I know that, and you know that, but she's convincing him otherwise. She talks about how much pressure we put on him to succeed, how we never let him make his own decisions. The final straw came 2 weeks before Margaret died. She overheard a phone conversation between Stella and someone else, though she couldn't tell who was on the other end. "The old lady is suspicious," Stella had said. Margaret was hiding in the hallway, having come upstairs to get something from our bedroom. But Levi's starting to see things differently. He's realizing how much they've held him back. Margaret listened as Stella continued. "She keeps all their financial information locked away, like state secrets. Levi doesn't even know how much they're worth. Can you believe that? They treat him like a child, but expect him to be grateful for their generosity." The conversation went on, with Stella painting a picture of Margaret and me as manipulative parents who used money to control our adult son. She talked about how easy it would be to help them see reason about updating their will, especially as they got older and more dependent on Levi for support. Margaret confronted me that night with what she'd heard. "She's not just after our money, Thomas. She's systematically turning our son against us, and it's working." I didn't want to believe it. Levi was our boy, raised with love and respect. How could he be so easily manipulated? But as I looked back on those last weeks, I could see the evidence. The way he avoided eye contact during conversations, the subtle hostility when Margaret asked about his plans, the way he deferred to Stella on every decision, even small ones. The night before Margaret died, after that terrible argument in our kitchen, she sat me down for what would be our last real conversation. "I'm going to protect our family," she said quietly. "Tomorrow I'm calling Jonathan." Jonathan was our lawyer. "I want to make sure our will reflects our actual wishes, not what someone else thinks they should be." She paused, looking out the window at the garden she'd tended for 23 years. "If something happens to me, Thomas, promise me you'll be careful. That girl isn't what she seems." "Nothing's going to happen to you," I said, kissing her forehead. 12 hours later, she was dead. As I sat alone in our bedroom, surrounded by her things, those final words echoed in my mind. Margaret had tried to warn me, and now she was gone. The timing felt more than coincidental. It felt calculated. 2 weeks after the funeral, I couldn't stand the silence anymore. The house felt like a tomb, filled with Margaret's presence, but empty of her voice, her laughter, her gentle corrections when I left my coffee cup on the wooden table, without a coaster. But worse than the loneliness was the gnawing certainty that something terrible had happened to her. I started with her medicine cabinet. Margaret had been taking medication for high blood pressure for about 5 years. Nothing serious, just a small white pill every morning with her coffee. Her doctor, Dr. Reeves, had always said she was in excellent health for her age. Heart disease didn't run in her family. Her mother lived to 89, her father to 92. I opened the prescription bottle and counted the pills. There were supposed to be 30, a month's supply that she'd refilled just 10 days before she died. But only 18 remained. That seemed wrong. Margaret was religious about taking exactly 1 pill each morning, never more, never less. In the bathroom drawer, I found something else strange, a second bottle of the same medication, this one nearly empty. The prescription date was only 3 days before Margaret died, but it was filled at a different pharmacy across town, one we'd never used before. My hands shook as I examined the label. The prescribing doctor was listed as Dr. Hamilton, someone I'd never heard of. Margaret had been seeing Dr. Reeves for 15 years. Why would she suddenly switch doctors without telling me? I called Dr. Reeves's office the next morning. His nurse, Carol, was sympathetic but confused. "Mrs. Morrison was doing fine at her last visit 6 weeks ago," Carol told me. "Her blood pressure was well controlled. She didn't mention any problems or concerns about switching doctors. Did anyone else call asking about her prescriptions? Maybe someone claiming to be family? There was a pause. Actually, yes. About 2 weeks before she passed, a young woman called saying she was your daughter-in-law. She wanted to know if Mrs. Morrison was taking her medication properly, said she was worried about her memory. My blood went cold. What did you tell her? Nothing specific, of course. Patient confidentiality, but I did mention that sometimes older patients benefit from having family help organize their medications, especially if they're taking multiple prescriptions. After I hung up, I sat in Margaret's chair by the window, trying to piece together what I'd learned. Stella had called Margaret's doctor, expressing concern about her memory and medication management. Days later, Margaret had a prescription filled at a different pharmacy under a different doctor's name. I drove to the unfamiliar pharmacy that afternoon. The young pharmacist looked uncomfortable when I showed him my identification and explained that I was Margaret's husband. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said carefully, "but I can't discuss specific prescriptions without proper authorization." "I'm not asking about prescriptions," I lied smoothly. "I just want to know if my wife seemed confused or disoriented when she came in. We'd been worried about her memory." The pharmacist relaxed slightly. "Actually, she didn't come in herself. A younger woman picked up the prescription. Blonde hair, very polite. She had all the proper identification and paperwork. Stella. It had to be. That evening, I called our neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who lived directly across the street. She was retired like us and spent most of her time tending her garden in the front yard. If anyone would have noticed unusual activity around our house, it would be her. "Oh, Thomas," she said, when I explained why I was calling, "I'm so sorry about Margaret. She was such a lovely woman." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. I was wondering if you might have noticed anything unusual in the weeks before she passed. Any visitors we might have had when I wasn't home?" "Well, your daughter-in-law came by quite often. Such a sweet girl, always bringing flowers or food. I saw her several times when you were out running errands." "How often would you say?" Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Almost every day for the last few weeks. She usually stayed about an hour. I remember thinking how nice it was that she was spending so much time with Margaret. Every day." Stella had been visiting Margaret daily, and I'd had no idea. Margaret hadn't mentioned it, which was strange. She usually told me about visitors, especially family. "Did Margaret seem different to you in those last weeks?" I asked. "Now that you mention it, yes. She seemed more tired than usual. A couple of times when we talked over the fence, she mentioned not sleeping well, and once she seemed confused about what day it was. I thought maybe she was coming down with something." After that conversation, I started going through Margaret's personal things more systematically. In her desk drawer, I found something that made my heart race. A small notebook where she'd been keeping a record of her interactions with Stella. The entries were dated, written in Margaret's careful handwriting. March 15th, Stella brought homemade cookies, stayed for coffee, asked many questions about our financial advisor, wanted to know how often we review our investments. March 22nd, Stella offered to help organize my medications, said she'd read that older people sometimes get confused about dosages. I told her I manage fine on my own, but she seemed insistent. April 2nd, strange conversation with Stella about Levi's childhood. He said he'd told her we were very strict, never let him make his own choices. This doesn't match my memory at all. April 10th, Stella brought lunch. While I was in the bathroom, I'm sure I heard her on the phone in the kitchen. When I came back, she was looking through the mail on the counter. The entries became more concerning as they progressed. April 20th, woke up feeling very dizzy and nauseous. Stella happened to stop by and insisted on making me tea. Feel much better after she left. April 25th, another bad night, heart racing, couldn't catch my breath. Stella says I should see a different doctor, that Dr. Reeves might be missing something because I'm getting older. May 1st, Stella brought me new vitamins, said they'd help with my energy. They're much larger than what I usually take, and they make me feel strange afterward. Decided to stop taking them. May 5th, found the vitamins I threw away back in my medicine cabinet. When I asked Stella about it, she said I must have forgotten throwing them out. Said memory problems are normal at my age. The final entry was dated just 3 days before Margaret died. May 10th, I'm certain now that something is wrong. I found different pills mixed in with my blood pressure medication. When I confronted Stella, she acted innocent, said I must be confused. But I know what I saw. I need to talk to Thomas, but she's always here when he's home, and I don't want to make accusations without proof. Going to call Jonathan tomorrow about the will. If something happens to me, I pray Thomas will see the truth. My hands were shaking as I finished reading. Margaret had known something was wrong, had been trying to document it, but she died before she could take action. I spent the rest of the night going through every inch of our bedroom and bathroom. In the very back of Margaret's jewelry box, wrapped in an old silk scarf, I found a small plastic bag containing several pills that didn't match any of her prescriptions. The pills were white and round, similar to her blood pressure medication, but slightly different in size and texture. On impulse, I decided to have them analyzed. I knew a pharmacist, Jim Wardlow, who'd gone to high school with me. He ran an independent pharmacy downtown, and I trusted him to be discreet. The next morning, I brought him the pills. "I need to know what these are, Jim," I told him. "It's important." Jim examined the pills carefully under a magnifying glass, then consulted a reference book. His expression grew serious. "Thomas, where did you get these?" "They were mixed in with Margaret's blood pressure medication." He was quiet for a long moment. "These aren't blood pressure pills. They're a cardiac stimulant, something that would be very dangerous for someone with any kind of heart condition. If someone took these regularly, especially combined with other medications, it could cause exactly the kind of cardiac event that—" He trailed off, looking at me with sympathy and growing alarm. "That killed my wife," I finished for him. Jim nodded slowly. "Thomas, I think you need to call the police." But I wasn't ready for that yet. I needed to understand the full scope of what had happened, and I needed to figure out how deep my own son's involvement went. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I went through Levi's old room looking for any clues about his relationship with Stella, any indication of when and how she'd gotten her hooks into him. In a box of his college papers, I found something that chilled me to the bone. It was a printed email from Stella dated 8 months ago, long before their engagement. "Baby, I know this is hard, but you have to trust me. Your parents love you, but they're holding you back. They want to keep you dependent on them forever. The only way you'll ever be truly free is if you start making decisions for yourself without their input or approval." There were dozens of similar emails, each one more manipulative than the last. Stella had been working on Levi systematically, convincing him that his loving parents were actually his oppressors. She'd identified his desire for independence and twisted it into resentment against us. The final email in the chain was dated just 2 weeks before Margaret died. "The situation with your mother is getting out of control. She's threatening everything we've worked for. Sometimes you have to choose between your future and your past. I know you'll make the right choice." I sat on Levi's childhood bed, surrounded by the evidence of my wife's murder and my son's betrayal, and for the first time since the funeral, I cried. Not just from grief, but from a rage so pure and focused that it scared me. They thought they were so clever, so careful, but Margaret had been smarter than both of them. She'd left me a trail of breadcrumbs, and now I knew exactly what I needed to do. The hardest part wasn't gathering evidence. It wasn't even accepting that my wife had been murdered. The hardest part was accepting that my own son had been part of it. I spent 3 sleepless nights after finding those emails, staring at the ceiling, trying to reconcile the boy I'd raised with the man who could participate in his own mother's death. Levi used to bring Margaret flowers from the garden when he was 5 years old, messy bouquets of dandelions and clover that she'd put in a place of honor on the kitchen table. He'd cried for hours when our old dog died, inconsolable, until Margaret held him and told him stories about all the good dogs waiting in heaven. How had that child become someone who could stand at his mother's funeral and talk about how she should have minded her own business? I knew I couldn't confront him directly. Stella had spent months training him to see me as the enemy, and any accusations I made would be dismissed as the paranoid ramblings of a grieving old man. I needed to be smarter, more subtle, So I decided to play their game. The first test came when Levi called me 4 days after my discovery in his old room. It was a Thursday evening, and his voice had that carefully modulated tone he'd been using with me since the engagement. "Dad, how are you holding up?" "About as well as can be expected," I said, injecting just the right amount of weariness into my voice. "The house feels so empty without her." "I know. We all miss her." The words sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced saying them. "Listen, Stella and I were talking, and we think it might be good for you to have some company. Maybe we could come by this weekend, help you go through some of Mom's things." My grip tightened on the phone. They wanted to come back and finish what they'd started, probably look for any evidence Margaret might have left behind. "That's very thoughtful of you both," I said. "I'd like that. There are quite a few things I'm not sure what to do with." We arranged for them to come over Saturday afternoon. That gave me 2 days to prepare. I spent Friday setting the stage. I put Margaret's notebook back exactly where I'd found it, but I made copies first. I returned the mysterious pills to her jewelry box, but not before photographing them and documenting their location. I wanted everything to look undisturbed, like a grieving widower who hadn't noticed anything suspicious. When they arrived Saturday, I was in what Margaret used to call my helpless old man mode, slightly confused, easily overwhelmed, grateful for any assistance. It was a performance, but one based on how I knew they already saw me. "Dad, you look tired," Levi said, though his concern felt hollow. "Are you eating enough? Sleeping?" "Not really," I admitted, which was true enough. "Everything reminds me of her. I keep expecting to hear her voice calling from the kitchen." Stella moved closer, her expression perfectly sympathetic. "That's so natural, Thomas. Grief affects everyone differently. Maybe you should consider seeing someone, a counselor or therapist." I looked at her with what I hoped appeared to be gratitude. "Do you think that would help?" "Oh, absolutely. And maybe a doctor too, just to make sure you're taking care of yourself. Sometimes grief can affect our physical health in ways we don't realize." Roar. The suggestion felt loaded, like she was already planning my next natural death. We moved to Margaret's bedroom, where I'd carefully staged several piles of her belongings. Clothes that needed to be donated, jewelry that should probably go to family members, papers that I wasn't sure how to handle. Stella went directly to Margaret's jewelry box. "She had such beautiful pieces," she said, running her fingers over the contents. "This must be so hard for you." I watched her carefully, noting how her hand lingered over the section where I'd replaced the mysterious pills. She found them exactly where Margaret had hidden them, but her reaction was perfect, just the right amount of surprise mixed with confusion. "Thomas, what are these?" she asked, holding up the small plastic bag. I moved closer, squinting at the pills like I'd never seen them before. "I have no idea. Maybe some old vitamins?" Margaret was always trying different supplements. "These don't look like vitamins," Stella said, her voice carefully neutral. "Maybe we should throw them away. You don't want to accidentally take something that might be expired." "Good thinking," I said, reaching for the bag. But instead of throwing it away, I slipped it into my pocket. "I'll take care of it later." For just a moment, Stella's mask slipped. I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes before she composed herself again. Meanwhile, Levi had found Margaret's notebook. He was flipping through it with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Dad, what's this?" he asked, showing me the notebook. I took it from him, pretending to see it for the first time. "Oh, that's just some notes your mother was keeping. She liked to write things down. You know how she was." Levi's jaw tightened as he read over my shoulder. "She was writing about Stella." "Was she?" I asked innocently. "What kind of things?" "Nothing important," Stella interjected quickly, moving to look at the notebook herself. "Just everyday visits, conversations. She was probably trying to remember things better." But Levi looked disturbed by what he was reading. I could see him processing his mother's careful documentation of Stella's behavior, her growing suspicion and fear. "Some of this sounds," he began, then stopped himself. "Sounds what?" I asked gently. "Nothing, never mind." But he kept glancing at Stella with an expression I hadn't seen before. Doubt. The afternoon continued with more careful probing. I asked seemingly innocent questions about Margaret's final weeks, about their visits, about her health concerns. Each question was designed to make them reveal more than they intended. I still can't understand why she went to that different pharmacy, I mused while we were going through her medicine cabinet. Dr. Hamilton? I've never heard of him. Did she mention him to either of you? Stella and Levi exchanged a quick glance. She mentioned something about getting a second opinion, Stella said carefully. Maybe she was worried about her heart condition. Heart condition? I looked genuinely confused. Margaret didn't have a heart condition. Dr. Reeves always said her heart was strong. Another glance between them, longer this time. Well, maybe it was something new, Stella said. You know how these things can develop suddenly, especially in people our age. Our age? I raised an eyebrow. Margaret was only 61. The conversation continued like this for 2 hours, with me playing the confused, grieving husband while they tried to maintain their story. But I could see the cracks forming, especially in Levi. As they were preparing to leave, I delivered my final test. You know, I said, walking them to the door, I was thinking about what Margaret said that last night, about protecting the family. Do you have any idea what she meant by that? Levi stopped walking. What exactly did she say? She said she was going to protect our family, that she'd figured out something important. She was planning to call our lawyer the next morning. I paused, watching their faces. She seemed to think someone was trying to hurt us. The color drained from Stella's face, but she recovered quickly. She was probably just confused, Thomas. Grief and stress can make people paranoid sometimes. Maybe, I said thoughtfully, but she seemed so certain. She made me promise to be careful, said that not everyone was what they seemed. Levi was staring at his shoes, his hands clenched at his sides. For a moment I thought he might break, might confess everything right there on my front porch. But Stella put her hand on his arm, and the moment passed. We should let you rest, Dad, Levi said, without meeting my eyes. This has been a long day. After they left, I sat in Margaret's chair by the window and reviewed what I'd learned. They were scared. Stella especially was rattled by the suggestion that Margaret had figured out their plan. And Levi, my poor manipulated son, was beginning to have doubts. But doubt wasn't enough. I needed something more concrete, something that would force the truth into the open. I thought about Margaret's final words to me, about protecting our family. She'd tried to warn me, tried to leave me clues, tried to document what was happening to her. Now it was my turn to protect her memory and ensure that justice was done. The next phase of my plan would be more dangerous. I would have to make them believe I was getting closer to the truth, force them into making a mistake. But I was ready for that risk. After all, I had nothing left to lose except the truth about what happened to the woman I loved. The breaking point came exactly 1 week after their visit to go through Margaret's things. I'd spent those 7 days carefully orchestrating what would either be the revelation of truth or the end of what remained of my relationship with my son. I called Levi on a Wednesday morning, letting my voice shake just enough to sound genuinely distressed. Son, I need your help, I said. I found something else of your mother's and I don't know what to make of it. What kind of something? His voice was guarded. Papers, medical records from that Dr. Hamilton I mentioned, and some other things that don't make sense to me. I paused, letting the silence stretch. I think someone needs to explain what was going on with your mother in those final weeks. There was a long pause. Dad, maybe you should just let this go. Mom's gone and dwelling on... I can't let it go, I interrupted, putting steel in my voice. She was my wife for 37 years, Levi. If something was wrong, if someone hurt her, I need to know. Another silence then. We'll be right over. They arrived within the hour, both of them tense and alert. Stella's usual sweet demeanor was strained around the edges, and Levi looked like he hadn't slept. I led them to the kitchen table, where I'd spread out a carefully curated collection of documents. Margaret's notebook was open to one of the more damning entries. The mysterious pills were in a small dish beside it, and in the center of the table were the copies of Dr. Hamilton's records I'd obtained through some creative phone work, claiming to be settling Margaret's estate. Sit down, I said, my voice harder than they'd ever heard it. Both of you. Stella tried to maintain her innocent facade. Thomas, you seem upset. Maybe we should talk about this when you're feeling more... Sit down, I repeated, and something in my tone made her comply. I picked up Margaret's notebook first. Let's start with this. Margaret was documenting her interactions with both of you for weeks before she died. She wrote down dates, times, conversations. She was building a case. Levi's face went pale. Dad, Mom was getting confused toward the end. You can't trust... Confused? I slammed the notebook down on the table. She was documenting attempted murder and you call it confusion? The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Stella's mask finally slipped completely, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. That's a serious accusation, Thomas, she said quietly. You should be very careful about making claims like that. Should I? I picked up the dish of pills. Then explain these. Margaret found them mixed in with her blood pressure medication. Strange, since they're actually cardiac stimulants that could cause fatal heart palpitations in someone her age. Levi was staring at the pills like they might bite him. I don't know what those are. Don't you? I turned to the medical records. Because, according to Dr. Hamilton's notes, these were prescribed to treat Margaret's supposedly declining heart condition, a condition that her actual doctor had no knowledge of. Stella leaned forward, her voice taking on a reasonable, therapeutic tone. Thomas, I know grief can make people see conspiracies where none exist. Stop. The word came out like a gunshot. Stop lying to me. Stop manipulating. Stop pretending to be something you're not. I looked directly at her, letting her see the full weight of my knowledge and anger. I know what you did to my wife. For a moment, no one moved. Then Stella sat back in her chair and smiled. It was the first genuine expression I'd ever seen on her face, and it was terrifying. You don't know anything, she said calmly. You're a sad old man who can't accept that his wife died of natural causes. Natural causes? I laughed bitterly. Is that what you call systematically poisoning someone over a period of weeks? Levi made a strangled sound. Dad, please stop. No, Levi, you stop. Stop pretending you don't know what she is. Stop pretending you weren't part of this. I turned to face him fully. Your mother tried to protect you from her. She saw what Stella was doing to you, how she was poisoning your mind against us. And when Margaret threatened to expose the truth, you both decided she had to be silenced. That's not... Levi began, but Stella put a hand on his arm. It's okay, baby, she said, her voice now devoid of any pretense of sweetness. He's figured it out. No point in pretending anymore. The casual way she said it, the complete lack of remorse, hit me like a physical blow. But it was Levi's reaction that destroyed me. Instead of shock, instead of outrage at being accused of murdering his own mother, he just looked resigned. How long? I whispered. How long were you planning this? Stella tilted her head, considering. Planning is such a strong word. I prefer to think of it as adapting to circumstances. She was going to ruin everything, Levi said suddenly, his voice hollow. Mom was going to destroy our future because she couldn't accept that I was grown up, that I could make my own decisions. Your own decisions? I stared at my son in disbelief. You call this your own decision? She manipulated you into believing your own mother was your enemy. She was, Levi's voice rose. Don't you see that? She controlled everything, our money, our choices, our relationships. She never wanted me to be independent. We gave you everything, I said, my voice breaking. We supported every dream you ever had. We never asked for anything except to be part of your life. Stella laughed softly. That's the problem with people like you, Thomas. You think giving someone money means you love them. But real love means letting go, letting people make their own mistakes. Real love? I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. You call murder real love. I call it problem solving, Stella replied coolly. Margaret was a problem. She was going to change the will, cut us out, make sure Levi never saw a penny of what should rightfully be his inheritance. It was never about inheritance, I shouted. It was about family, about being there for each other. You're right, Levi said quietly, and for a moment I thought he was going to apologize, going to show some remorse. Instead, he looked up at me with eyes I no longer recognized. It was about family, and Mom was willing to destroy our family to maintain control. The words felt like a knife to my heart. This wasn't my son speaking. This was Stella's creation, a hollow shell, programmed with her twisted logic. You didn't destroy our family, I said, tears streaming down my face. You did. The moment you decided she was expendable, you destroyed everything we built together. Stella stood up, smoothing down her dress. Well, this has been therapeutic, but I think we should go. Thomas is clearly having some kind of breakdown. Sit down, I said again, and this time there was something in my voice that made them both freeze. We're not finished. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up a small recording device I'd hidden behind the coffee maker. Their eyes widened as I held it up. You see, I learned something from Margaret's notebook. She documented everything because she knew people like you would try to rewrite history. So I decided to follow her example. Stella's face went white. You recorded us? Every word. Your confession, your complete lack of remorse, your admission that you murdered my wife because she threatened to expose your manipulation of our son. Levi was on his feet now, panic replacing his earlier resignation. Dad, you can't what? Turn in my son and his accomplice for murder? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Watch me. For the first time since I'd known her, Stella looked genuinely afraid. Thomas, think about what you're doing. Levi is your only child. If you do this, you'll lose him forever. I lost him the day he chose you over his mother, I replied. The boy I raised died in this kitchen the moment he decided Margaret deserved to die for loving him too much. I moved toward the phone, but Levi grabbed my arm. Dad, please, I know what we did was wrong, but... Wrong? I shook him off. It wasn't wrong, Levi. It was evil. Your mother loved you more than her own life, and you repaid that love by helping a stranger poison her. Stella moved toward the door. Levi, we need to leave. Now. But Levi didn't move. For the first time in months, maybe years, he seemed to be thinking for himself. She's right, isn't she? Mom never tried to control me. She just wanted to protect me. From me, Stella said quickly. She wanted to protect you from having a real relationship, from building a life with someone who actually understands you. No, Levi said slowly, as if waking up from a long dream. She wanted to protect me from you, and I was too stupid to see it. The mask of confusion Stella had been wearing fell away completely, revealing the predator underneath. Don't you dare blame me for this. You wanted her gone just as much as I did. You said so yourself. She was never going to let you grow up. I said that because you convinced me it was true, Levi's voice broke. God, what have I done? What have we done? But it was too late for regrets. The damage was irreversible. Margaret was dead, and nothing could bring her back. I looked at my son, this stranger, wearing my son's face, and felt something inside me die. The love was still there, buried under layers of betrayal and grief, but it was no longer enough. Get out, I said quietly. Dad, Levi began, get out of my house, both of you, and don't come back. They left without another word, but I knew this wasn't over. Stella wouldn't let it be over, not with evidence of their guilt in my possession. But I was ready for whatever came next. Margaret had tried to protect our family, and she'd died for it. Now it was my turn to protect her memory, even if it meant losing everything else I had left. I didn't go to the police. I know that might seem strange, given everything I'd discovered, but I had my reasons. The recording was damning, but defense lawyers are clever. Stella would claim she was just playing along with a grieving man's delusions. Levi would say he was trying to protect me from the truth about his mother's declining mental state. They'd twist Margaret's careful documentation into the paranoid ramblings of an elderly woman losing her grip on reality. But more than that, I realized that public justice wasn't what Margaret would have wanted. She'd spent her final weeks trying to protect our family's dignity, trying to handle the situation quietly before it destroyed us all. She wouldn't want her memory tainted by headlines about family murder and betrayal. So I chose a different path, a quieter one, but no less final. The first thing I did was call our lawyer, Jonathan Myers. I'd known him for 20 years, trusted him with our most important decisions. When I explained that I needed to make some immediate changes to my will, he didn't ask questions. I want everything to go to charity, I told him. The house, the investments, the life insurance, everything. Split it between the Children's Hospital where Margaret used to volunteer and the Literacy Foundation she supported. What about Levi? Jonathan asked carefully. Levi gets nothing, and I want that spelled out explicitly in the will, not due to oversight, not due to estrangement, but by deliberate choice. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. "Thomas, that's a significant decision. Maybe you should take some time." "I've had all the time I need," I said firmly. "Draw up the papers." While Jonathan prepared the new will, I began the second phase of my plan. I started liquidating assets, closing accounts, simplifying my financial situation. Everything I could convert to cash, I did. Everything I could donate immediately, I did. Within 3 weeks, I'd dismantled 37 years of careful financial planning. The joint accounts Levi might have expected to inherit someday were gone, their contents distributed to charities across the state. The investment portfolio we'd built for our retirement was cashed out, the proceeds sent to organizations Margaret had cared about. I kept only enough to maintain myself for the remainder of my life, and even that was placed in an irrevocable trust that would revert to charity upon my death. Then I disappeared. Not literally, of course. I'm not a dramatic man, despite everything I've been through. But I moved away from the house where Margaret and I had been happy, where she'd died, where our son had chosen money over love. I found a small apartment in a town 2 hours away, a place where no one knew my story. The house I left to the children's hospital, along with instructions that it be sold and the proceeds used for their cancer ward. I thought Margaret would like that. Our home, helping other families face impossible challenges with more hope than we'd been given. For 6 months, I heard nothing from Levi or Stella. I assumed they were waiting for me to calm down, to come to my senses, to realize that I needed them more than my pride. They had no idea what I'd done with the money, no concept that their patient waiting was for nothing. The call came on a Tuesday evening in October. I almost didn't answer when I saw Levi's name on the caller ID, but curiosity won out. "Dad?" His voice sounded strained, desperate. "Where are you? I've been trying to reach you for weeks." "I'm where I need to be," I said calmly. "We need to talk. There are things I need to explain. I think you explained quite clearly 6 months ago." A long pause, then, "Dad, I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but I'm sorry. Stella and we're not together anymore." That caught my attention. "Oh?" I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about what we did to Mom. And Stella, his voice broke. "When she realized you weren't going to forgive us, when she saw that her plan wasn't working, she left. She took everything she could get her hands on and disappeared." I felt a cold satisfaction at that news. "I see. Dad, I've been seeing a counselor trying to understand how I let her manipulate me like that. I know I can't undo what happened, but I want to try to make things right." "Make things right," I repeated. "How exactly do you propose to do that, Levi? Your mother is still dead." "I know, but—" "And you still helped kill her." The silence stretched between us, filled with all the words that could never be taken back. "I want to turn myself in," Levi said finally. "I've been thinking about it for months, what we did, what I did. It's eating me alive. Maybe if I confess, if I tell the truth about what happened, it might help somehow." For a moment I felt something that might have been pride in my son, but it was quickly overwhelmed by the futility of the gesture. "And then what?" I asked. "You spend 10 years in prison, get out, and we pretend to be a family again? Do you think that's what your mother would want?" "I don't know what she'd want," Levi whispered. "I just know I can't live with this anymore." "Then don't," I said simply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you made your choice when you chose Stella over Margaret. Now live with it, or don't. But don't expect me to help you ease your conscience." I could hear him crying on the other end of the line. The sound should have moved me, should have awakened some paternal instinct to comfort my child. Instead, I felt only the echo of Margaret's voice, warning me to be careful, telling me that not everyone was what they seemed. "Dad, please. I lost Mom. I lost Stella. I lost everything. Don't make me lose you, too." "You didn't lose me, Levi," I said quietly. "You threw me away, just like you threw away your mother's love, her trust, her life. You threw it all away for a woman who saw you as nothing more than a means to an end." "I know, but there is no but. There are only consequences, and this is yours." I hung up the phone and sat in the growing darkness of my small apartment, thinking about justice and mercy, about love and betrayal, about the difference between forgiveness and enabling. Margaret had been right about Stella from the beginning. She'd seen through the mask, recognized the predator, tried to protect our family from destruction, and she'd died for that wisdom. But she'd been wrong about one thing. She'd thought Levi was worth saving, worth protecting. She'd believed that underneath Stella's influence, our son was still the loving boy she'd raised. I knew better now. The boy she'd loved had made a choice in that kitchen 6 months ago. He'd chosen greed over gratitude, manipulation over truth, murder over love. And that choice had revealed something fundamental about who he really was. Over the following months, I heard fragments of Levi's story through mutual acquaintances. He'd lost his job, apparently unable to function normally under the weight of his guilt. He'd moved back to the old neighborhood, but the house was gone, sold to benefit children he'd never meet. He was drinking heavily, making sporadic attempts at therapy, occasionally talking about confessing to crimes no one else believed had been committed. Stella, meanwhile, had vanished completely. She'd taken what money she could access from Levi's accounts and disappeared, probably to find another lonely man with another gullible son. She was good at what she did, and there would always be new victims. A year after Margaret's death, I received a letter from Levi. It was handwritten, shaky, the paper stained with what might have been tears. "Dad," it began, "I know you probably won't read this, but I need to try one more time. I've been sober for 3 months now, going to meetings, working with a sponsor. I know I can't undo what I did, but I'm trying to understand how I became someone capable of hurting Mom. The counselor says that guilt without action is just self-pity. So I've made a decision. I'm going to confess, not to make myself feel better, but because it's the right thing to do. Mom deserves to have the truth told, even if it's too late to matter. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even want it, because I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I remember who she really was, how much she loved us, how wrong I was about everything. I love you, Dad. I know I lost the right to say that, but it's still true." I read the letter 3 times, then put it in the drawer with the rest of the documents from that terrible year. Evidence of a family's destruction, carefully preserved but never to be examined again. 3 weeks later, I read in the local newspaper that Levi had been found dead in his apartment. The official cause was listed as accidental overdose, but I knew better. He'd finally found a way to live with what he'd done. I didn't attend his funeral. I sent no flowers, made no statements, offered no comfort to distant relatives who remembered him as the sweet boy he'd once been. That boy had died months before his body finally gave up. Instead, I sat in my small apartment and remembered Margaret. Not the woman who'd died afraid and alone, poisoned by people she'd loved, but the young woman I'd married 37 years ago. The one who'd believed in second chances, who'd seen good in everyone, who'd loved our son enough to die trying to save him from himself. She would have forgiven him, I think. She would have found a way to separate the crime from the child, to see his final letter as proof that some part of her boy had survived. She would have gone to his funeral and cried for the future we'd all lost. But I am not Margaret. I am harder, less forgiving, more practical about the nature of consequences. I loved my son, but I loved my wife more. And in the end, that made all the difference. I live quietly now in my small apartment with my small life. I volunteer at the local library twice a week, helping adults learn to read. It's something Margaret would have enjoyed, and it feels like a way of honoring her memory without drowning in it. Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, choosing isolation over reconciliation, justice over mercy. But then I remember the sound of Stella whispering at Margaret's funeral, the coldness in Levi's voice when he said she should have minded her own business. And I know that some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness. Margaret always said that family was about more than blood, that it was about choosing to love and support each other every single day. By that definition, Levi stopped being my son the moment he chose Stella's lies over his mother's life. And I stopped being his father the moment I chose to let him face the consequences alone. It's a hard peace, but it's peace nonetheless. Margaret is gone, Stella is gone, Levi is gone. The money they killed for is gone too, given to strangers who will never know the price that was paid for their benefit. I am the last one left, the sole survivor of a family that destroyed itself through greed and manipulation and the terrible power of lies believed too easily. But I am also the keeper of the truth. And sometimes, in the quiet evenings when the apartment feels too empty and the memories too heavy, that feels like enough.